Frank lives in a small town in Florida and is raising his 7-year-old niece Mary on his own. Today is her first day at school, but Mary flatly refuses to go. She believes that homeschooling is more than enough for her. Besides, there will be no one to play with the cat while she's gone. Frank assures her that the cat will manage just fine and refuses to continue the argument. As they part, he asks Mary not to stand out too much at school and just be like everyone else. Watching this scene from her window, the neighbor insists that the girl should stay at home. Frank explains that he doesn't want to deprive the child of her childhood, and for that, she needs to spend time with her peers. During her first lesson, Miss Stevenson gives the children simple addition problems, and the whole class answers in unison. Mary can't resist interrupting the teacher, criticizing the school program. The teacher scolds her and challenges her with more complex problems, including the multiplication of 3-digit numbers. Mary hesitates for a moment and then correctly answers all the questions. At the end of the school day, Frank arrives to pick Mary up. Outside, he is approached by Bonnie, who tells him that Mary is very advanced for her age. She easily solved complex math problems. Smiling, Frank replies that the girl simply knows the quick calculation method and that there's nothing particularly genius about it. Frank works as a boat repairman at the marina. His flexible schedule allows him to spend a lot of time with Mary. They often go for walks, and during these outings, Mary behaves like an ordinary child, forgetting about studying. Despite her initial dismissive attitude toward her peers, Mary gradually adapts to school and even begins to socialize with her classmates. During the show and tell lesson, she brings her Fred and joyfully talks about him to the entire class. In the next math lesson, the teacher decides to give the class a test. Before she even finishes explaining the rules, Mary hands in her sheet with the answers. Anticipating this, the teacher gives her an additional task from the high school curriculum. Mary completes it flawlessly as well. Convinced of her student's talent, the teacher begins to research her background and finds an article about Mary's late mother. Diana Adler was a brilliant mathematician who worked on one of the most challenging problems. One day she couldn't take the pressure anymore and ended her life, leaving 6-month-old Mary an orphan. That evening, the teacher finds Frank at a bar to learn the truth about Mary. It turns out that, aside from her uncle, Mary has a grandmother and a neglectful father who abandoned her mother during pregnancy. Frank blames himself for his sister's death, feeling he didn't give her enough attention. He fears that Mary might follow the same path, so he is determined to give her a full-fledged childhood. The next day, on the school bus, Mary stands up for a classmate and breaks a bully's nose. Because of this incident, Frank is called to the school. Miss Stevenson tells the principal about Mary's mathematical talent, so they decide not to expel her. Instead, the principal suggests helping to transfer Mary to a private school for gifted children, where she can receive a proper education. Frank refuses, citing his family's experiences. He is afraid that studying in such an institution would deprive Mary of many joys in life. In his opinion, growing up in a regular school will help her become a decent person, and that is enough. The school principal contacted Mary's grandmother, Evelyn, and told her about this difficult situation. Evelyn is a very strict and goal-oriented woman, focused only on results. She believes that the environment the child is in, her home and school, is entirely inadequate by any standards. In her opinion, Mary cannot have a normal future in such conditions. The girl must study in a specialized institution and dedicate her life to mathematics, just as her mother Diana did. Frank believes that Mary should stay in a regular school. He is convinced that she needs to have a real childhood, something neither he nor Diana ever had. Unable to reach an agreement, Evelyn advises Frank to prepare for a court battle. That evening, Frank spends time at a bar. Later that night, Bonnie shows up at the bar. Over conversation, Frank and Bonnie have a few drinks and eventually return to Frank's home together. The time for the court proceedings arrives. During the preliminary hearing, Evelyn's representative secures permission for his client to spend weekends with Mary. On Saturday, Evelyn takes Mary to the city and brings her to the university's mathematics department. She also tells her granddaughter about the Navier-Stokes equations, which Mary's mother once worked on. The ploy works. Mary starts to consider continuing the family legacy. Later, Evelyn introduces her to a professor who is supposed to evaluate her potential. The man gives Mary a complex equation to solve, but this time, she struggles. Outside, Mary admits to her grandmother that the task wasn't actually that difficult. The equation, in fact, had no solution due to a mistake made by the professor. Returning to the lecture hall, Mary corrects the formula and properly solves the equation. Back home, Mary visits a child psychologist as required for the court case. While waiting, she tells Frank that she enjoyed visiting her grandmother but doesn't want to live with her. Frank reassures Mary, promising that he won't lose the case. At the first hearing, Evelyn's representative calls Mary's biological father to the stand, as he is technically her legal guardian. In his testimony, the father officially relinquishes his parental rights in favor of Evelyn. However, Frank's lawyer easily convinces the court that the man has never been a real guardian for Mary, so his opinion should not hold any weight. At home, Mary becomes upset when she learns that her father was in town but didn't bother to see her. To cheer her up, Frank takes her to the hospital maternity ward and asks her to wait a bit. Soon, a stranger appears in the lobby, joyfully announcing to his family the birth of his son. This scene reminds Frank of the day Mary was born. At the next hearing, it is revealed that Frank used to be a professor at Boston University, but left his teaching position after his sister's death to raise Mary. Evelyn's lawyer argues that Frank is an unremarkable failure who risks ruining the future of a gifted girl. He declined to enroll Mary in a prestigious school, despite her obvious talent. However, Frank's lawyer presents a different perspective on Evelyn. He demonstrates that she was excessively demanding with her children, and this pressure led to Diana's tragic death. He argues that granting custody to Evelyn could be harmful to Mary. After hearing both sides, the judge decides to postpone the ruling. That evening, the lawyer suggests that Frank consider a settlement, which Evelyn's representatives have already approved. According to the agreement, Mary would be placed with a good foster family and transferred to a private school chosen by Evelyn. Both parties would have scheduled visitation rights. When Mary turns 12, she would be allowed to decide for herself where and with whom she wants to live. The next day, Frank visits the foster parents to finalize all the details. Faced with no other options, Frank reluctantly agrees to the terms of the agreement. Soon, he takes Mary to her new family. The girl begins to cry and begs her uncle not to leave her. She reminds him of his promise. But Frank silently walks away, barely holding back tears. Left alone, Frank throws himself into work, trying to distract himself from his sorrow. At the scheduled time, he visits Mary, but the foster father stops him at the door, explaining that Mary has refused to see him. She is still dealing with stress, and it would be better to postpone the visit. Back home, Frank finds himself unable to settle. Looking at Mary's belongings, he begins to regret his decision. One day, Bonnie happens to notice an animal shelter advertisement featuring a picture of Fred, the cat. After learning the shelter's address, Frank immediately heads there. Speaking with the staff, he pieces together who might have abandoned Fred. Taking the cat home, Frank gathers a box of his sister Diana's belongings and, together with Roberta, heads to the foster family. Learning that Evelyn is staying in the guest house, Frank goes to meet her. It turns out that the grandmother had arranged with the foster parents to hire top mathematics tutors for Mary to provide additional academic challenges. When Mary sees her uncle, she runs out of the house in tears. Outside, a heartfelt scene unfolds as Frank apologizes for his actions, and they reconcile. Returning to the house, Frank asks the tutors to leave and then hands Evelyn a document containing the full solution to the Navier-Stokes equation. It turns out that Diana had solved the problem, but had asked her brother to publish it only after her death. Evelyn, realizing how important this work was to her daughter, agrees to Frank's proposal. He will gain full custody of Mary in exchange for the equation. After a brief hesitation, she consents. In the next scene, Mary is shown among university students, attending a lecture on advanced mathematics. After the class, Frank picks her up and takes her to a playground where the girl happily plays with her peers.